Hello and welcome to episode 33 of The Racer's Edge as we look back at the Japanese Grand Prix. Yet another win for Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull Racing. It's been a sad week though. We lost Maria Di Vallota on the weekend of the Japanese Grand Prix. Our thoughts are with Emilio, her father, her family, her friends, and the Marussia team, for which she was a reserve driver. And on Tuesday, the news broke that Shaun Edwards had lost his life in an accident in Australia, a bizarre accident. He went out to Australia to do the Porsche Super Cup race at Bathurst, and afterwards went to Queensland to a circuit there to do some instruction, it appears. And they were in a Porsche 996, lost control. The other driver, the young driver, lost control, and it looks like a head-on accident, and he died instantly. Very, very sad. I knew Guy, his father, extremely well, spent a lot of time with him in his racing career, and with Daphne, his mum, and I went round to their place a lot when they lived in London, and Shaun was there playing around with little racing cars and all sorts of things that little boys get up to, and he was the apple of his dad's eye, and so sad that the accident has happened this way. I suppose we have to say that neither of those accidents are related to what we call the sport in the way that we run motorsport, but nonetheless, lessons must be learned. And I guess one of them is there's a lot of tuition going on. There's a lot of young drivers out there who do earn a bit of money by giving tuition to up-and-comers, to young hopefuls, and it is a dangerous thing to go out on a racetrack wearing helmets, overalls, seat belts, etc. It doesn't do the job if it's in a high-performance car on a racetrack. That's why Rob Wilson always sticks to Bruntingthorpe with lots of wide open spaces and sticks to absolutely stock standard road cars. But that's another story. At this time, we remember Shaun and Maria. Well, life does go on, and we had the Japanese Grand Prix, as I say. Sebastian Vettel, absolute masterclass again of how to nurse a car with a damaged front wing at a stage of the race when he was trying to extend his stint as much as he could to make it a two-stopper, going into the unknown a little bit, and he's driving in the middle phase of that Japanese Grand Prix, just superb. The way he was freeing up the car, particularly on exits of corners, just wonderful to watch. I've got my old sparring partner, my great friend and colleague Craig Scarborough with me to analyse the Japanese Grand Prix, and particularly to analyse a lot of the technical details that we saw over the weekend. Craig, welcome back to the Racer's Edge. We've missed you. I know you've been a little bit unwell again. I hope you're fine now.
Just man flu.
Good, man flu, good stuff. Scarbs, I have to say, I called the Japanese Grand Prix incorrectly. I thought if they were going to split strategies at Red Bull, they would go Mark 2 stop, Sebastian 3 stop, have him on nice fresh tyres at the end of the race just to cover all possibilities. What do I know about it? Obviously nothing at all. Just chatting to Christian Horner, and the reality is that the options they went for, absolutely correct when you actually think about it, because Mark, in that early phase, as good as he was in qualifying and as good as his driving was at Suzuka, once he gets stuck behind another car, it really affects the way the tyre wear builds up. And Sebastian was able to hang back a little bit, have a bit of free air. Mark was trying to put pressure on Romain, but in that first stint, he was starting to radio in and saying the tyres are going away, which was the reason that he came in relatively early at the end of that first stop. Why is it that, and we see it in GP2 as well, is it a function of the Pirellis, do you think, or why is it that being behind a slower car being behind another car, because Romain wasn't slow, has so much effect on tyre deg these days?
I think it's just the car is just working inefficiently. Obviously the wings aren't working as well, so the car will slide more, and we know with these Pirelli, as soon as you start to slide, then you really start to degrade them quite rapidly. So the more you can keep the wheels in line, the better. And obviously when you're following another car, you don't have that luxury. So I guess it's the feature of the Pirellis, but I don't think it's anything that we haven't seen over the years, sort of anyway. Yeah,
and the race went on there with Mark coming in for his second set, apparently having just taken a chunk of the time out of Romain Grosjean, and you were thinking, wow, this race is on now. But then he came into the pits, it was kind of weird, but that's what happens these days. Before the pit stop, the driver said, right, you're coming in, and they just told to go flat out and use those tyres up, which is what Mark was doing at that point. And it kind of made sense because they wanted to get him in a position where maybe he could pass Romain, which maybe he could do on fresh tyres towards the end of the race, which is why he did that. Yeah. And they were marking Romain. They were trying to predict what he was going to do. Was he going to follow Sebastian? Was he going to follow Mark in what they were going to do? So it would have, I think the really interesting thing from Suzuka would have been if Grosjean had gone onto a three-stopper at that point, That would have been an interesting race
Yeah.
at the end, because he was struggling a little bit towards the end.
He was a bit, but I think that the whole concept of Lotus this year is to run very easy on the tyres and to run less stops. So I don't think it probably would have worked out for him if he had opted for a 3-stopper, even if he could have been more aggressive.
Yeah, maybe you're right there. And I guess the real moment of the race, well, there were two moments. One, when Sebastian, in Christian's word, got a bit agitated when he was coming up behind Sergio Perez, or he's racing with Sergio Perez, and that's when he put out the radio transmission saying, "Keep him away from me." It wasn't a Mark thing, that was a Sergio Perez thing. And then, of course, Mark got behind Grosjean at the end of the race and took a long time to get past.
Couldn't nail the move straight away.
Yeah, and it was frustrating because you almost wanted to say, you were shouting at the picture saying, Nico Hülkenberg's been here with Daniel Ricciardo, and it was difficult into turn one. You can do it if the guy bobbles slightly, but he's very slow into spoon, as indeed Grosjean was, which was the double apex left leading onto the back straight. Hang back there, get a run, and maybe the inside into 130R. But having said that, I think Mark last year described Grosjean as a loony or something, didn't he? So he probably was never going to go inside him at 130.
First lap lunatic, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
I think
so he's probably never going to go inside at 130R. But Hülkenberg made that 130R move look pretty good, I thought. And actually, ironically, Ricciardo got a drive-through, didn't he? For coming out of 130R, having passed Perez, I think.
I think it was Perez, it was quite early in the race,
and then running on the grass. That's a whole new discussion, isn't it? Whether you pass somebody and then you go on the grass, whether you then deserve to get your drive-through. I suppose the argument is, well, he wouldn't have gone on the grass if he hadn't been doing any overtaking at all. So therefore, he must have got an advantage from going off the track, so therefore we must penalise him. But it's a bit harsh, I think.
It's strange because obviously going off on the dirty outside of the track and overtaking someone, you probably should get points for that rather than having a drive-through taken away, because that was a hell of a manoeuvre.
Yeah. Right. I know you're bursting to talk about the issue of the moment, which is traction control on the Red Bulls.
Yes.
It's been a big talking point. Our colleagues in America actually first, I think, started talking about it, and it's sort of gone from there. But what's your view on the whole thing? Well, bring us up to speed on what they're saying.
Well, there's been rumblings all year about engine mappings and traction control and clever systems on the Red Bull, and over the past few years we've kind of got used to lots of conspiracy theories, somewhat more well-founded than others, to be fair, around the Red Bull, and increasing in, I think the key moment was that moment after the safety car in Singapore when Sebastian was pulling away at 2 seconds per lap, and everyone's like, this domination, there must be something on this car which can be is providing this level of corner exit traction in particular. So everyone started to work out the theories of what could this possibly be, and I've seen some really way out theories. The main one seemed to be that they're using KERS as a traction aid, not actually traction control. Obviously any kind of active system that helps the driver is banned, but people seem to think there's some kind of a pulsed output of the KERS on the Red Bull, and lots of other systems around that sort of area. One of the other things everyone notices is that mid-corner, the Red Bull sounds very different, particularly Sebastian Vettel's car sounds very different. People describe it as a grinding sound mid-corner. So if that was KERS providing some kind of benefit, KERS is pretty silent. So I think we can discount anything to do with these areas. And I think all of this is just going back to is people trying to understand what makes the Red Bull so much better. And I think there's been a compound effect since mid-season, certainly, when the tyres changed, which has really kind of unlocked the potential that the Red Bull car has had all year. If we remember this time last year, Sebastian again was suddenly running away with a championship battle up until mid-season, when the tyres were much more variable, was way open. But again, once this RB9 this year and the RB8 last year was freed up from, having to manage tyres during the race, which to be fair, Red Bull haven't been very good at, and obviously lobbied very hard post Silverstone to get these slightly more robust tyres racing. So that's one of the key things. But fundamentally, the Red Bull chassis is just much better, and one of the key things that separates particularly Webber from Vettel with that car is how they manage the exhaust gases, and particularly as they pass through the corner. So whereas Mark Webber is very much more the classic late brake, doesn't carry much mid-corner speed and then puts it foot down on the exit, Sebastian tends to carry much more mid-corner speed, and in doing that he's actually mid-corner, he's got some throttle on. Now, if we remember a couple of years back, all this off-throttle, hot-blown, cold-blown diffusers, all of this business, there was lots of rules changed to say that when you're off the throttles must be closed and you can't be doing anything clever. But there is a point up to about half throttle position where you can be doing some clever stuff with the engine, and actually rather than running it on 8 cylinders, you're running it on 4. And what that means is the other 4 cylinders are just pumping air out of the exhaust pipes without creating any power. So Red Bull have been very good at getting this mapping working for them, and it's all about the driving style that you can carry a bit of throttle mid-corner, which means the exhaust is still blowing over the diffuser, which gives you lots of downforce just as you're coming up to the corner exit, and that's at low speeds, which means you've got downforce at low speed, you can put your foot down even harder, and you clear off up the straight so much quicker. It's fairly complicated
Well, it is fairly complicated. I mean, far be it from me to disagree with anything you say. I find it hard to believe that Mark isn't able to do that certainly on medium speed corners and high speed corners. I can understand on slow speed corners that Sebastian possibly is doing more with the throttle, but to my eyes, Sebastian, when he's on a slow speed corner, it showed at the hairpin at Suzuka, certainly Monte Carlo, we've seen it at Silverstone as well. What he actually does on very slow speed corners, he just extends the straight more than Mark, and he brakes into a relatively slow minimum speed rotation, and then has a very, very straight exit. He V's the corner much more than Mark does on the hairpins anyway. Maybe what we're talking about isn't applied to hairpins anyway because it's very slow speed. Maybe what you're talking about is second, third, fourth.
Yeah, exactly.
Third, fourth, fifth gear.
Which Singapore abounds with.
Yeah, which Singapore abounds with, and maybe it was that. I mean, Mark is convinced, and it looks that way to me, that Sebastian is just so good on the slow stuff. He's very good on very slow speed change of direction. That's where he's really, really good, just in terms of what he does with the car. But Mark around Suzuka was fabulous. It was such a shame that his race didn't work out for him, really. I mean, I'm not speaking as a Mark Webber fan, although I'm a Sebastian fan as well. Yeah. But it's deflating when you qualify on the pole and you finish third or second like that. I mean, it was a struggle for him. Yeah. Just before we get off Mark, the fire extinguisher in Korea, or the lack of fire extinguisher in Korea, what are your thoughts on that and that conflagration?
It always seems to surprise. We don't see fires very often. In fact, having said that, we saw 2 fires at Suzuka this weekend.
Well, that was going to be another. That's an adjunct to that question. We're seeing a lot of naked flame this year, it seems, relative to other years. Is that coincidence or what?
I often remark that when do we ever see anyone actually let the extinguisher off on a Formula One car? Because we know they carry them. I know they're obviously there to meet the regulations, but they are, somewhat limited in their performance. So we didn't really see any evidence of that going off.
Well, according to Christian, he did actually try and he did actually activate it. The problem is that it's 1.7 kilos of foam is the FIA maximum limit, and that doesn't do a lot with a fire of that intensity. And that was caused by the broken oil cooler and the oil on the hot exhaust. Exactly. And we're talking serious heat here.
Well, you've got quite a lot of oil. I think the extinguisher has a limit in how long it can let the gas off for. So I think it's something like about 10 seconds. I'll have to check the regulations. But a 10-second blast of fire extinguisher on a big oil fire is probably never going to. And
we should explain here, there are actually 2 activation points. One inside the cockpit, and that's really just to protect the driver if it's a really serious fire around him. You can just activate that, and it's 10 seconds that, in theory, you get out of the car in that time. And then there's one behind the driver, which the marshals can activate, and didn't. No. But even if they had, it's unlikely it would have had much effect anyway, because we're talking, as I say, 1.7 kilos of foam. And it was a long way from the fire anyway, where that nozzle is. So it wouldn't have made a lot of difference. But you're right, we had Jean-Eric Verne had a fire, Gutierrez had a fire. Yeah. All different. Very different. There's no pattern here at all, apart from the fact that they're happening. And is it maybe the common factor is just packaging again? I don't know. Is packaging even tighter this year than last year? More chance of things going up? Every year they move on to another extent. I guess there's always scope with the bodywork will catch fire. Carbon fibre strangely does catch fire. Relatively easy once it gets very hot. So particularly with the brake fire, the flash fire for Gutierrez was obviously, I think, was just the fuel fillers must have let a bit of vapour off that just caught. I didn't actually catch the exact details of that one. No, and he was quite cool actually how he got out of the car, got back in, qualified pretty well and finished 7th. Good job. We'll get onto that in a bit. So just to finish that whole business of traction control, forget it.
There could always be the possibility that they are doing something incredibly clever, but I can see absolutely no evidence for any of the theories that have been punted around on this.
But what you do have is a picture for us of an LAT photograph of the front wing of the Red Bull.
That's right. We're coming into the very end of the season now, and obviously we've got the regulations changing for next year. So all the little aero tweaks that we talk about today are all very, very tiny things. We're not talking about B-spec cars or anything. And one of the things that Red Bull have done is put a couple of little vertical fins on the front wing. And if you actually look at the main front wing there, where the R would be on the main part of the wing, you can see some two black vertical fins. We've never seen anything in this position or that shape before. And again, these are just working with the winglets and the vanes that are on top of the wing. And it's not about downforce, it's all about just creating vortices that go around the front wheel that you can see sat just behind there. Obviously the spinning wheels create a lot of turbulence. And these vanes, as you can see there, just letting off a small vortex, which just offsetting some of the turbulence created by the front wheel, which means that the back aero at the back of the car works so much better. And it's interesting that Red Bull have introduced something in that area this year, because for next year the wings are going to get a little bit narrower, about 7.5 centimetres each side. So they're going to have to work that section of the wing much, much harder to get this aerodynamic effect of offsetting the turbulence of the front wheels.
So that's no different then from the vortex generators we see on old 737s, where they just cover the entire wing, basically just to generate a bit more lift.
I mean, we're seeing all sorts of little tweaks. You know, the rules are still relatively open for the front wing, so you've got lots of scope for adding lots of surfaces and bits and pieces. And all of the clutter that you see on the front wing is all about managing the front tyre wake.
Scarbs, that reminds me that what we've got to try and do sometime between now and the winter, which is coming soon, is get a current Formula One brake duct into the studio somehow, haven't we? Because the brake duct, there's so much going on now behind the scenes of the hub, the tyre and the wheel and the brakes, that aerodynamically it's a work of art in there, I think, isn't it? And I mean, you for sure knew this, but I was staggered to learn that they have gurneys now, gurney flaps on the internals of the brake ducts, and they can take off a gurney overnight. Obviously, they don't do it during FP in the middle of practice, but that's the sort of detail they're playing with now in terms of the airflow inside the brake duct. Gurney flaps in the brake duct. I'm just blown away by that.
Well,
so's the air too.
On the subject of that, something I learned over the past few weeks was Red Bull take two 3D printers to every race in their in the pit garage, and during the weekend they're churning out parts, 3D printed parts for the car to actually go onto the race car. And one of the things they do is actually tune the front brake ducts, rather than, as you say, adjust them with little bits of carbon fibre. They just go from print to one that's exactly the right size for their needs, which when I found out, it absolutely blew me away that teams have gone to that level of complexity nowadays.
Well, the brake duct is one of the key areas of the car now, it appears. There's a lot of talk around it and a lot of work being done around brake ducts. And when we talk about when are you starting on the 2014 car, how long does it take to build a car, we never really think about how much detail work goes into the brake duct design, front and rear. Yeah. And interestingly, apparently, the rear brakes of the 2014 cars are going to be less powerful. They don't need quite as much braking on the rear because of what the engine can now do in terms of ERS. So there's a lot of development going on now with that, a lot. Okay, we've now got Fernando Alonso in the Ferrari. A bit of a mediocre second half of the year for Ferrari, isn't it? Very difficult.
I mean, even today, Alonso has been very vocal in the press again, been very negative about Ferrari, that since Silverstone they've not taken this step ahead. Parts that they've brought to the race haven't really delivered the results, and arguably the tyres have gone against them. I mean, I don't think at any stage the Ferrari has been a superb chassis this year, but it's made the most of the tyres at some of the races earlier in the year, which has probably flattered it. And now that it doesn't have this tyre advantage, you know, I think Suzuka and Korea have demonstrated that the car isn't even the second best chassis out there. It's, you know, it's challenged by the Lotuses and the Mercedes.
And they're always out there back-to-backing on Friday, Massa and Alonso, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, probably more so than probably most other teams, that they're Friday, they'll run different side pods between the cars, they'll introduce new parts. We've seen parts tested that have never appeared in a race, or appeared in one race and never appeared in another. They just seem to still to be somewhat lost, even though they've got their wind tunnel back now, in their aerodynamic direction. And whatever they seem to try just isn't working on the chassis. So in recent races, they've had a revised front wing where the slots run almost all the way across. If you can see the red section of the front wing there, you've now got these full width slots because they're actually making more of the wing work harder to create more downforce. They've done some tweaks at the back of the car with the diffuser, like most of the teams have, to gain more downforce, and the little vanes that they put in front of the side pods as well has had come in for detail development. But these are just all very small tweaks, and they're not really bringing the car back onto the pace, to really get that kind of P2, P3 grid position that arguably they should be capable of.
Do you think they'll go pull rod or push rod next year with James Allison there?
I think they'll probably stick with what they've got. I think the front of the chassis, having seen the rules in a bit more detail now and start to understand some of the things people do in the cars, they'll probably, a lot of the core of the chassis won't change as much as perhaps you'd expect. It'll actually be the detachable nose cone that's going to change the most. So I think they'll probably stick with pull rod for next year.
Do you see any James Allison effect on the car now?
No, not yet. No, I mean, the changes we've seen are just very small detail bits. I don't think James Allison will have any influence on the F138 at all. I think all his time will be focused on the procedures that they'll be going through to design the 2014 car. And that seems to be, this kind of process issue seems to be where Ferrari's having problems, because they're designing bits that I think are going to be great and they don't deliver. So there's obviously something fundamentally wrong with the way they're assessing these parts.
And he'll be focusing very much on the wind tunnel and aero and Dirk de Beer and settling all that down, won't he?
Exactly, yeah.
Where are Ferrari at with their wind tunnel development now, the actual tunnel?
Well, they've got their tunnel back now. It's back online. So I would imagine that they'll probably keep the 138 in the Toyota tunnel in Cologne and do more and more of the development on the 2014 car in the Maranello tunnel, but probably still take the model over to Cologne just to make sure that the results are the same in both tunnels.
Whereas McLaren just using the Toyota tunnel still and continuing to use that through to 14 for the development of the new car.
So I understand, yeah.
No bad thing. We've got a lot of time for that Toyota tunnel.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely one of the best ones out there, and it's great that they have the capacity to take all of these teams on board with their tunnel.
Now we've got a nice drawing of the front wing assembly of the McLaren here, Scarbs.
Yeah, McLaren have been trying really quite hard on some of the details they've been bringing to the car over the past few races. We could argue they're not maybe having the effect that you would expect, and it's sad to say McLaren are probably on their way to their first winless season since 2005, perhaps, I think it was. One of the things they've done is they've changed the front wing mounting pillars, as you can see there. So the one in yellow is the new one, and you can see that it actually mounts to the front wing much further back than the one there in white, probably about 10 centimetres backwards. The fact that it's mounting towards the back of the wing isn't so much the issue. It's what they're doing is they're moving that aerodynamic surface that it creates further back, because you're limited on the length of how big you can make this pillar by the regulations. So they're just moving it back, and that just helps the downstream airflow towards the floor work a little bit better. One of the interesting things they did, they tested this wing on Friday and they ran it for the weekend. Obviously, as you can see, that it appears as though the wing is actually being mounted at a much smaller piece of the wing. There's like that joint has to be so much stronger. And they did some tests to make sure that the front wing wasn't flexing. Yeah. And what they had is, just on top of the nose where the mobile signage is, they had a little sensor looking sideways at the wing. On the inside of the end plate, they had some stickers, and the sensor would detect if the wing was flexing unduly on the straights. Which fantastic little piece of technology. I wish we could have had a clear photo of it. Unfortunately, there wasn't any there.
Well, it'd be nice to have that on every car to see the difference in flexing between a Red Bull and a Ferrari and a Lotus, wouldn't it?
I think it's fair to say that the flexing of wings has kind of disappeared a bit now.
But they still move, for sure.
They move, but when you look at them over the curbs, they're far more rigid than they have been in recent years. And I think that's a good thing, because that's the way the rules should be. McLaren have done some other bits and pieces as well. I think we just got a general view of the car as well. The vertical vanes, like these toast rack type things on the fronts of the side pods, they've added an extra fin there, so they've now got 4 fins over the top of each side pod. They've changed the rear wing, and then changed some details of the beam wing and the little, what they describe as the monkey seat wing. I still prefer to call the Y75 wing, because it's a little bit more politically correct. Lots of changes, but...
Y75?
because it's 75 millimetres from the centre line of the car.
Yeah,
Although it's actually
course.
15 centimetres wide, but the team would call it a Y75 wing, but fans still like to call it a monkey seat.
Monkeys are back in fashion, though. You see that, I think it's Iran have just sent one up into space, or they're going to send another one up into space. Anyway,
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I've not been following the Iranian space. I've been looking at racing cars.
Anyway, a monkey went into space the other day.
Exactly, there you go. So, McLaren doing lots of stuff to the car. Lots of interesting details. It's good to see they're still pressing ahead with development. But
here's the big question. Whereas you get the impression that Sauber, and as Tom was saying last week, they've put a lot of effort into this year's car now just to try to understand where they're at, to see if they've got a proper platform from which to go into 2014. Do you think McLaren know where they're at and where they're going wrong as effectively as Sauber do right now?
Knowing McLaren, I would say yes. But I don't think the evidence is seeing on track. They're making lots of changes, and the car is becoming much more conventional in its design in lots of respects. There's lot less McLaren-specific ideas on there. So, I think they are, they're working so hard so that they do understand the car ready for next year. It would just be nice if it translated into some more immediate results for them.
Well, it would, and it was a messy weekend for Sergio Perez. Jensen kind of reminded us that he got the best from the car, which was fine, but it's disappointing to see McLaren struggling so much. But it was a difficult weekend for Perez. In fact, alongside his Mexican countryman, you'd have to say Gutierrez had a more polished weekend than Sergio.
That's fair to say.
I love that word Christian used just then when I was chatting to him, saying that Sebastian got a bit agitated by Perez. I haven't heard, my mum says agitated. It's a good word, actually. I've got to use that a bit more. What does when Rob's talking about somebody who drives perfectly but is actually not very quick, he says, but he's not really energizing the car. That's quite a good phrase as well, I think. Energizing and agitated, there we go. Let's pause there because we have a couple of people to talk to. One of them, a young British driver we referred to before on this show, very promising, very talented. He's been working hard to come up the ladder in the most effective way. He's had a few slightly dodgy periods, but he's really got it together now, driving for Prema Powersports in Euro F3. Alex Lynn scored his first big win of the season in Vallelunga last weekend. He's been looking very, very competitive. He was right there at Zandvoort as well. And of course, he dominated Formula Renault in England a couple of years ago. So Alex, very talented young prospect, good brain on his shoulders as well. And much more importantly, this is really what I want to talk to him about. His dad owns the ex-Bob Jane Lotus-Cortina that I saw Bob racing back in Australia in 1966. And Alex has actually done some races in that. So Alex Lynn, I want to ask you about that in a bit. But first of all, congratulations on your win in Vallelunga.
Yeah, and I think the championship's been really strong this year. And that was my third win of the season, which is always nice. And to get it from pole position and clear off by 5 seconds is always good. So, I think in terms of my situation at the moment, I'm third in the championship. So going into the last round, I'd like to, I can't get any further than that, but I can certainly consolidate my third and hopefully try and get a couple more wins.
Alex, tell us about what it's like driving for Prema Powersports, because quite a lot of non-English drivers are in that team and have driven for them, but it's quite interesting that A, you chose them, and B, you're with them. What are they like? What's the character of the team like?
Well, it took me a long time to get used to actually working with foreign people, because the whole of my career has been with the British team. And I'm really glad I decided to, move to a foreign team this early on in my career, because at some stage or another, I would have had to have done it. And getting used to Europeans rather than English people takes quite a bit of doing. But the team's obviously fantastic, winning the championship 2 years in a row previous with Danny Giancadella and Roberto Meri. And they're in a good position to do it this year with my teammate Raffaele Marcello. So it's a great team, and I'm really enjoying being part with them.
And how has life worked out for you this year in terms of being based, I presume you're still based at home in England, but driving for them? How much travelling have you had to do? How much time have you spent with them between races?
At the start of the year, it was a lot. It was a lot of travelling and a lot of time being spent there. But as the year sort of gone on, the races have been a bit further apart, so I didn't need to spend so much time there. And I think at the start of the year, it was probably a bit it didn't really go to plan so much, I think, because of the amount of travelling I was doing. Because I think the more planes you catch, like the less time you spend focusing on your job. So I kind of just I based myself here, and the chief engineer of Prema is actually based in Brackley. So if ever I needed to go through stuff, I just popped up to him, and it took a couple of hours, and we went through everything we needed to, and I went home. So it's actually worked out quite well with having the chief engineer being English and based just a few hours up the road.
And can you just remind us who that is?
A guy called John McGill, who works at Toro Rosso and Renault F1.
Oh, okay. And so he commutes. How much time does he spend in Italy? And where are Prema based, actually, in Italy?
Just outside Venice.
Oh, right. Nice. And how much time does...
He goes over quite a lot. But I think whenever he goes over, he spends like over a week. So whenever he goes over, he like really spends a lot of time and goes through a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And obviously Raphael has a big reputation. He had that reputation at the start of this year. He's got Ferrari behind him. Ferrari are big with him. So to some extent, from your point of view, you're putting yourself up against him. And as things have turned out, it hasn't been too bad, eh? Bearing in mind it's your first full season of F3 at this level. Yeah,
no, it hasn't been too bad. And to be honest, obviously he's done a fantastic job, and I've learned a lot from the way that Ferrari conduct themselves with him and the effort they put into everything he does. And if you don't learn from an infrastructure like that he's got around him, then it's not a good thing. But certainly I've learned, how the process they go through and all the effort they put into him, and I've tried to like create a mini scenario of that myself, because they put a lot of effort into him, and he's obviously very lucky to have that, but he makes the most of it, and he certainly delivers. So if I continue to do the championship next year, then I'm going to be putting everything that I've learned through watching him doing well, and putting it towards myself for sure.
And presumably you've met some of the Ferrari guys as well, which won't have hurt.
Yeah, I know. It's quite cool actually, just having Luca Baldessari hanging around at racetracks and knowing that he engineered Michael Schumacher to many world titles. It's quite funny, really.
Well, did he congratulate you after the win at Vallelunga, the most recent win?
Yeah, no, they're all really supportive of all the drivers, and if any of us have got an issue of anything, like they're the first people to try and help, like either Luca with the team or the engineers that come with Raffaele to support him. Like they're all really supportive, and it's a real team effort, which is nice. It's a really good team effort, which I've never really experienced before, to be honest.
Alex, I'm so glad we're chatting, because I became a big fan of yours when you started winning British Formula Renault races going out of sight, like every race. I think it was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Then you started to do some Euro Cup races, and it's kind of flattened out a little bit. But here you are again, almost at the point where you were, I would say, back in those golden Formula Renault days.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, my win on Sunday was very reminiscent of that, and it felt nice. But I think, to be honest, to make the leap from Formula Renault to Formula 3, I had to do a bit of growing up, and it's come from a domestic championship to then an international one. And something as hard as European Formula 3 takes time. And I think I needed to take myself out of the comfort zone of being with a British team, with a British engineer and everything, being very comfortable, to moving out and pushing my boundaries and to become a fully professional racing driver. And I want to become, Formula One world champion. And to do that, you need to be the complete package. And I needed to do that for myself. And I think I finally learned how to do that.
Well, Rob Wilson spends a lot of time with us on the show. We talk about a lot of intricate details of driving. He speaks very highly of you, and you've done quite a lot of work with him recently, I believe.
Yeah, and I saw Rob. It's quite funny, really, because I'm quite superstitious, and I've always, ever since I've gone to Rob, the next few races I've gone to have always gone really well. And sure enough, I saw Zandvoort after a really difficult Nürburgring weekend, and then I had, after seeing Rob, 5 podiums on the bounce and my first win in a while. Rob always does well to me, and I love going to see him. I really like what he teaches, and me and him are always on the same wavelength with driving styles, and it's quite cool.
How do you balance what you learn or what you go through with Rob with what you're doing in a simulator? And I believe you're in a simulator today, for example. How does that work with Rob in terms of what the two different components provide?
I think what Rob teaches becomes instinctive. Like, he teaches it in a way that's not forced upon you, but it's because he teaches in such a relaxed manner, it becomes very instinctive. And that's what I find anyway with my driving. Like, I don't have to try that hard to then start to relate what he says to my driving. And in the simulator, I use that. So, for example, today, just to practice all the things I need to do better with my technique. And because I think you can't become a faster racing driver in a simulator, but you can certainly become a more complete one and just iron out all the things that you need to improve before a weekend. Like, for example, this morning I had all of my data from the last test we had from Hockenheim, and I could see which corner I was losing time to my teammates and what I needed to change to become faster. And you just keep on practicing everything you need to become better, and hopefully by Friday morning when we start practice, all of that will be natural. Like everything that Rob teaches, you would be driving better just naturally.
Alex, before we get on to the really important issue, which is the Lotus-Cortina, one final question. Where are you at in your head? I know the answer is going to be, well, I'm focusing on this year, but are you thinking Formula One? Is that where you're going? Is that where the only thing that matters to you? Or are you thinking already perhaps, I don't know, DTM or something like that?
I think for sure Formula One is the absolute goal, and I will try everything I can in my power to get there, like every young racing driver. But I think, times are really difficult for people to get to Formula One, and professional drives are gold dust these days. So, of course, my main focus is completely Formula One, but a professional drive in something is overall what has to happen, I think, because obviously I've dedicated everything I have towards my career. And so, yeah, Formula One's the dream, but a professional career is something of a must, if you understand.
I do indeed. And finally, the ex-Bob Jane Lotus-Cortina, which I actually saw racing in Australia back in 64, 65. Lovely car, cream with the Shell stripes down the middle. Bob had Shell sponsorship for many years. But your dad owns that car, and you've actually raced it a few times, I gather.
Yeah, it's something I'd like to do in my spare time when I'm not racing. And my dad loves his historic racing, and the Cortina's something that, to be honest, it does frighten me on a regular basis. And he races it at places like Goodwood, and to be honest, I'm a bit too scared of driving something that's that tail happy around a circuit like Goodwood. So Silverstone's probably the perfect place for me with all that runoff and everything. So I competed in the Silverstone Classic this year actually, and finished sixth from last on the grid because we had an engine blow up in qualifying. So I was quite happy actually.
So that is the characteristic of this Lotus-Cortina, your Lotus-Cortina. You would describe it as just being tail happy.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think we've got the best setup on it because it's a bit frightening. Like typical of historic racing, like last year we found out that actually the axle was moving midway through a corner and creating a big oversteer, which obviously shouldn't happen on a racing car. You shouldn't have the axle loose, but
no.
It's typical.
But the Lotus-Cortina was really built to be driven on three wheels, perhaps even two, but three most of the time. That's how they were at their peak. And I hope to see you three-wheeling all over the place, really, in that car.
Absolutely. I mean, the curbs get quite a lot of abuse, and most of the time the grass as well. To me, I've never seen Silverstone look more like a football pitch in my life.
Superb. Well, I look forward to seeing you in that. And it's always refreshing to talk to a driver who's thinking a little bit beyond his own little world. And good luck to you. Alex, very best wishes for this weekend at Hockenheim, the finale for a very good year for Formula 3 in general, for European Formula 3. And let's hope you come back with some more wins. Best of luck.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Alex, Lynn, top man. Right, Scarbs, back to you. Nick Chester's doing a good job taking over from James. We were talking about James earlier. He's gone to Ferrari, but Nick, in the hot seat mid-season, but what
Yeah.
a good job he's doing keeping that together. And Lotus F1 performance the last couple of races, just brilliant.
Yeah, I mean their entire season has been fantastic. Such a huge step forwards for them. And as you say, these last 2 races, the car really has come into its own, particularly in Romain's hands rather than Kimi, who seems to be struggling more. And it was
I was going to say, imagine if Kimi actually woke up on Friday and Saturday as he obviously wakes up on Sunday and is the same racing driver. I'm being a bit unkind there, but Kimi's had a bit of a weird last couple of races. He's actually been crashing the car and doing funny un-Kimi-like things. But I presume his brain's on something else now. Next year, but he does race well on Sunday still and carves through the field and does it well. But anyway, let's get back to Romain, because what a start he made at Suzuka.
Yeah, wow. And equally, both Red Bulls had a bad start. If Webber had made that perfect start that I think it was still waiting for after all these years.
I was going to say, by Mark's standards, it was actually quite a good start, wasn't it?
At
least he was P2 into the first corner, which Seb sort of got fairly near him, but he did do that. It's not an easy place. I mean, here he says again as a rank amateur, but it's not an easy place to make a great start, Suzuka, actually, that downhill thing. And,
it's a bit trickier.
It's still a bit tricky, but Romain, just fabulous. And it was great watching his car on board from Mark and the way he was driving, because it was just that lovely, fluid, I was going to say soft, but he's not a soft driver at all, but he's got that lovely, fluid, oversteery style. And I don't think he ever hit any sort of geometrical apex at the hairpin, but it didn't matter at all. He was sideways a bit, and there he went. Yeah. And he did the job in the sense that Mark's tyres went away in the wake of that Lotus F1. But it's a quick car. I mean, just race in, race out. It's a really good car.
It's a good car.
And it's getting better. I mean, what developments have they been working on?
Visually, there's very little that's changed on the car, but obviously since Korea, they've been running with a long wheelbase version of the car where the front wheels are 10 centimetres forwards, and they've changed the nose and the wing, as we discussed at Monza where they first tested it. So that seems to be giving them this stability in the braking area, which is one of the things that the car was previously lacking. It was interesting that Alan Permet made some comments this week about Kimi struggling with his new Pirelli tyres. So just as they seem to be getting the car into the sweet spot, Kimi seems to be struggling with not having a sharp enough turn-in on with the new generation of Pirelli tyres, which is interesting. Is probably one of the reasons he may have dropped away in the past couple of races. I don't think the long wheelbase is probably helping him in that respect either. But
and I recall relatively recently there was talk about the steering rack load again with Kimi, and one wonders. I'm not supposed to say that. Somebody wrote in and said Peter's not allowed to say one wonders. Sounds like the Queen. So I'll say I wonder.
Can they not?
I wonder if that steering rack load has changed since the new, because they're running slightly lower ride height at the front, I think, based on what Tom was saying last week in the Sauber interview. With the new generation Pirellis, the second half of the year, they're running slightly lower, and maybe that's changed the load on the rack. Maybe, and Rob made the point at least 18 months, if not 2 years ago, that Kimi drives very differently in where he feels the steering, and he needs. It's not that he lacks muscular strength; it's just that he doesn't necessarily do it all from the hands. It's coming from the shoulders and right through his arms with Kimi. And if he doesn't have the right steering load and the feel from the rack, he's in trouble. Maybe you're right. Maybe,
it's all very subtle
that's what it is. Yeah.
With the change in the obviously the steering from the long wheelbase and the different stiffness of the front tyres.
And the wheelbase, good point.
There's it's very hard to tune these steering racks. I mean, it's not impossible, but they don't have a lot of time to actually go out and just run, a handful of different racks in a day in a test like they used to be able to nowadays for the driver to come back and feel.
But you would imagine that is something, emphasis on the is, that they could do in a simulator, is it not?
Oh, you wonder if it is, but again, it's I think when you're coming into the very finer points of sensitivity, I think there's some things you just simply can't recreate.
And anyway, Kimi doesn't go to the simulator anyway, so it's a moot point. And what about Romain's unusual failure in Singapore? That wasn't it?
It was the pneumatic valves, which obviously in a Formula One car they don't have valve springs like you have in the majority of road cars. They have a little air cylinder that closes the valve for you, and that had leaked. And we saw the poor Renault Sport mechanic lying on the floor trying to get to the put a nitrogen cylinder onto the top-up valve. few years ago, this was much more common that, they would come into the pits and have
Tell
a
me about it. I was at Williams in '92. I mean, we had a lot of issues with because it was absolutely pioneering technology.
Absolutely.
Then. I think
Renault introduced it in the late 80s with their old V6 turbo.
And we used to plug the old airline in every time he came into the garage. I think they probably do as well.
And lots of cars still have a very accessible nitrogen recharging point. The McLaren one is actually right next to the seat. They just reach in and plug a cylinder onto it, but the Renault one, you had to take a panel off and you had to put the thing on, and obviously it still leaked and led to his retirement. But with the current range of V8 engines, we very rarely see an engine failure. And obviously, I think Korea we saw a couple, didn't we? Which is odd in itself.
It's the modern day equivalent of the rotor button on the distributor, isn't it? I mean, what a most ridiculous reason for a retirement, broken rotor button on the distributor, but it used to happen. Now, massively complicated engine, you retire because of an air leak.
Yeah,
Same
absolutely.
thing. Mind you, the most absurd reason for retirement was in the turbo era, and I guess we're going to see it again, when you used to get an exhaust manifold leak. Split exhaust manifold completely destroys the engine, just one little crack in the exhaust. Nigel Mansell, Monaco, '87.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was just a change in gauge of the exhaust manifold. There you go. I don't think Patrick Head was told that Honda were changing the gauge at the time, and there was a certain amount of discussion after that particular race. Thank you very much. So Lotus, doing a great job. Mercedes, what are Mercedes up to?
Mercedes, again, their car hasn't changed an awful lot over the past few races. They've changed one very small detail, which is in front of the rear tyres. They've had a slot, what we call this tyre squirt slot, which again is to stop this turbulence from the rear wheels going into the diffuser. We've spoken about this quite a few times, and they've just tripled that slot up, very similar to the Ferrari one. And it's actually all machined out of metal around the edge of the floor. It's like a titanium piece. And obviously, with the puncture that Hamilton had at the last race, the flailing tyre absolutely wrecked that part of the floor and the brake duct, and I think it was actually the brake duct that eventually led them to retire the car because of obviously hot brakes. But the aerodynamics would have been ruined on that side of the car already, just from all this relatively delicate bodywork around there.
Great shame that, but a function actually of how narrow Suzuka is. It looks a narrow circuit now by a lot of standards, by Korean standards, and it's great. We love Suzuka, a wonderful circuit, but we usually have some sort of start line into turn 1A shunt because it is so narrow there.
It's still an old track.
They say, I got squeezed out. Well, that's what happens at Suzuka. There's no room. There's no room for 3 cars really.
No.
Off the line there. So, bad luck for Lewis. Who knows how that would have... Where do you think he would have finished if he'd had a perfect race? Third?
No, I don't think. I think
Fourth?
they would have struggled with their tyres.
Wouldn't have beaten Grosjean?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think I still don't think the Mercedes has got the tyre management consistently, and I think they did struggle. I mean, obviously Rosberg struggled through the race as well. So,
right. Sauber, love the new Pirellis. Force India, hate them.
Yeah, I mean,
as we discussed last week on the show.
It's a seesaw, isn't it? And it's obviously it's a shame for Force India because the car appears to be exactly the same, but it's just dropped completely out of competitiveness, which is a real shame for them because they've worked very hard and they did their homework over the winter and reaped the rewards for the first half of the season. I
kind of see them as our team because we were there for the launch and we did all that nice stuff, and you predicted that it would be a good car, nice and conventional, and do the job. And to lose all the momentum like that is very frustrating.
Yeah, and they're not the team that have got the resources now to start to re-engineer the car to bring it back to competitiveness. So it's, the second half of the season really has been lost for them.
What they need is Ron Dennis to take the team over. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? I'd love to see that. And I've been saying for a while now that if Ron Dennis... I don't suppose the McLaren people are going to like this, but anyway, if Ron Dennis announced tomorrow that he was severing all links with McLaren and selling everything and being an individual, and he was going to do a Formula One team for 2015, A, I think he'd get a lot of people working for him, good people. B, I think the team would happen. And C, I think he'd probably be winning races inside 2 years. I still got a lot of time for Ron. And if there's any truth in that rumour that he might be involved in Force India, that is unbelievably good news for Force India. Because this guy, yes, he's difficult. Yes, he takes punts and he's out there on the edge. but he's an absolutely passionate racer, and he knows how to put a racing team together.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Ron Dennis fan in many ways. I wasn't a fan of the way he poached all those people from Williams, I guess, but at the end of the day, results are results, you know,
Yeah.
and he's a racer. There's no question about it. So, yeah. We're not expecting things to change really for Force India between now and the end of the year.
I just don't think they have the resources to climb back up. I think they're, you know, they can do some stuff with setup, but I think fundamentally they're just not getting the tyres to work, and that'll be the end of that.
Scuderia Toro Rosso, and there are quite a few people in Faenza, I heard the other day, who don't even know that STR are in their town, that they exist even. They're very low key. It's amazing. And all that comes from poor old Giancarlo Minardi, who was very low key himself and never really beat the drum about everything. And it's, you know, if STR were in my hometown, I'd be around there getting autographs every day.
But I mean, I went to the unit when it was Minardi many years ago, and I pulled up outside, and obviously days before sat-nav, and thinking, where's the factory? And it's only because I saw through the reception window that they had the Minardi shield on the wall, and it's like, there it is. So yeah, very, very low-key team, and probably a lot of respects having a fairly low-key season as well, apart from...
Yeah, but a lot of real pace from Ricciardo now. Ricciardo in the race. He's showing signs of being really quick, and well, the car and he being really quick, and also Q3ing as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly getting the job done and to get
but yet another fire. Jean-Eric Verne had a fire.
Yeah, it's very strange.
It
appears that both rear brakes were stuck on for some reason. And obviously, they'll very quickly overheat and catch fire. Which is now
Brembo's knowing
they're on Brembo's. Obviously, their previous technical director Giorgio Mascanelli's gone to Brembo directly.
Yeah, that's right. He has,
speaking with some people in the sport, there was lots of talk that maybe they are doing something not very clever with the brakes, but they probably are playing with elements of the brakes to try and get
with STR.
To do something. So it could well be related to something that we're trying to do with the setup.
By the way, we haven't spoken since the Brembo guy came up to me at Singapore and said, was I aware that McLaren were now on Brembos? And when I went down to McLaren to ask a few people, they said, well, that's news to us. But actually, when I finally did get through to somebody who actually did a proper check, and he came back and said, they were running Brembos on the front and Carbon Industry on the rear. Akebono calipers all round. But,
on the
Brembo
material.
On the front, yeah. So that's quite a big change for McLaren, and I suspect that's coming from Jensen, because he's always been a really big Brembo guy, and I know they do a lot of brake dyno stuff at McLaren, comparing CI with Brembo and all the rest of it that comes along. So be interesting to see what brakes McLaren run next year, actually, on the 2014 car. Maybe they'll be going to Brembo as well, who knows. Because when Lewis had that problem in Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, the brake problem which caused his retirement, 2010, it was a caliper, I think, but nonetheless it was clear that he was running Brembos on the rear in that race and Carbon Industry on the front. All you people out there that think that brakes are boring, bear in mind that they are a litmus test of how the driver's using the brakes, and it's actually, therefore, the reason we go on about brakes is because it's a very good way of having a look at the way the drivers are thinking and what they're wanting from the brake pedal. And as we saw when Fernando went to McLaren and wanted the Hitcos, and Lewis went to Mercedes and immediately demanded the Carbon Industries. That's because Lewis has a sufficiently sensitive foot not to have to worry about having any aids, and he just wants stopping power, and that's what he's got. And all credit, as I said in the article in F1 Racing recently, that Nico Rosberg adapted it as well as he has to the Carbon Industries. It couldn't have been easy for him, I wouldn't have thought. Right, Williams. We went to Brands Hatch to have a look at Williams at their partner day, so we'll have a look at that in a minute. But just before we do that, Scarbs, what are your comments about Williams at the moment?
Williams still seem to be a little bit lost, don't they, with understanding what they're doing with the car. We're seeing at most races they've got a range of different noses, different front wings. They introduced a new front wing in Korea, and we have a picture of it here, and if you can see the little black winglet atop the main wing, what we call the cascade winglets, these have just changed shape recently, and they're much more twisted in the direction how they're turning the airflow around the car. Interestingly, those cascade winglets that we're talking about here, these black ones, Where their vortex goes is actually on the inside top of the front tyre, and again that's offsetting the turbulence that the tyre will create, which then, as we said before, affects the airflow downstream. So they're still very much playing about with this area. They've not raced with swing yet, so I wonder if this is again them starting to think about what solutions will work for 2014. And as you can see in the picture there, the right-hand side of the wing has the white Flovis paint on it, so they can see where the surface airflow is going on the wing. You can just about see it looks a little less, little less in shadow than the other side. So, still development going on. Obviously, Pat Simmons is running the ship there now, technically, which is, I think, is a good person for the role there.
Very good person for the role.
As understood, they had other developments in line, which included some work around the side pods and the exhaust and diffuser, but it's been decided not to run that this year, that the investment wasn't worth the return on pace. So I think we're not going to see Williams having a big resurrection at the back end of the year, which again I think is a real shame, because I think they've got the facilities there to be one of the strong midfield teams like they were last year, but seem to have drifted a bit.
And Caterham, Mauricia, relatively close and still slightly adrift, but they do see the Williams sometimes. Singapore, they were up there with them.
Yeah, they're sort of battling amongst them. Obviously, we saw Max Chilton have a fantastic qualifying performance. It's one of the first times that Mauritia has out-qualified both the Caterhams. And still Mauritia have got that, I think it's a 13th place back in I think Malaysia for one of the cars, where that's the one that's bringing them up in the championship. Mauritia are now sitting 10th rather than 11th. So when you look at the balance of the year, it's going to take quite a change to get Caterham back up to their 10th. So for the first time, Caterham could well be finishing last in the championship. And
much development going on with those two teams?
Both teams have pretty much packed up sort of mid-season and are focusing on all their resources into developing the car for next year. Minor changes sort of running up towards Monza, as you would expect, but by and large it's focusing purely on the next year.
Yeah, Bianchi finished 13th in Malaysia.
13th Malaysia.
Yeah, good job.
I think all of the teams, all the drivers have got a 14th. Bianchi's got that critical 13th, which gains them that extra position, and obviously a lot of money for the championship.
Well, as I said, we went down to Brands Hatch on Wednesday it was actually, to have a look at the Williams Partner Day. It wasn't very serious. It was just a lot of fun, hanging out with Formula One people. Hasn't been a great year for Williams, but nonetheless, it was good to do some laps of the circuit with some of the drivers and to, just smell a bit of racing cars again. Always a treat to come to Brands Hatch. One of the great motor racing circuits. Sadly not one of the great Grand Prix circuits these days, for obvious reasons. But, I say obvious reasons. Formula One paddocks are so vast these days, they couldn't even begin to think of going to Brands Hatch. But this was not one of my most favourite buildings either when it was erected by Nicola Fulston when she owned the circuit on the outside of Clearways and what is now known also as Clark Corner, pleased to say. But it does serve its purpose. It's where sponsors, etc., can watch on the outside of a very nice right-hander, decreasing radius right-hander, and where Williams have been staging this week their Partner Day. Just a fun day out really for the sponsors, a few of the media, friends of the team. Lovely to see Frank again, just to catch up with Frank. And obviously it's been a tough year for Frank Williams, but he is still loving every minute of it, particularly the travel. He's got a Falcon 50 that he leases these days and still finding the intrigue of Formula One to be something that gets him out of bed in the morning, and that's a wonderful thing. But the main thing of a day like this is to try and be up close with the drivers. So I queued up and did a few laps of what I would call the club circuit with Valtteri Bottas in a fabulous little Renault Clio with paddle shifts. This is how it looked. So here we are leaving the garage on the beautifully kept Brands Hatch circuit,
as it is today, owned by Jonathan Palmer, of course. And I've got to explain, there are two guys in the back as well, so you hear a bit of laughing and giggling going on. That's not me, that's them. That's not, I take no blame for that. But those two guys, it just shows what days like this do for sponsors and people associated with the team, because they'd been out with Valtteri before and just came back for more. Two-pedal car, as I say. The object was here actually to try and be a little bit serious and see if we could get some footwork. And it being a two-pedal car, of course, the coordination process is very much as it would be in the Formula One car. There are a few moments here where Valtteri gets quite a lot of opposite lock on the car, right there, for example. And although it doesn't appear from the forward-facing camera that we're going that quickly, bear in mind it's a wet track, and also bear in mind that that is a deceptive view because it's slightly wide angle, and in reality we are going reasonably quickly. The beeps you hear are gear change points, I think. I didn't really notice them at the time, but I noticed them on the video now, so I think that's what it must have been. And I don't think it was a traction thing, because it wouldn't have broken traction that frequently. So here we are going along the top straight. Always a privilege to drive with Valtteri. One of the things that Rob always says about, or comments about with some drivers, is the amount of excess wheel movement, and there's a lot of jiggling as you approach a fast corner. But you can see that going into Paddock Bend, he's just downshifting and beautifully precise in everything he does. And of course, he'd one of the next generation, the young generation. He'd never driven around Brands before, so it was a big thing for him to come to a circuit like this. And of course, he loved it, being Valtteri. Another big opposite lock moment there in the middle of the corner, but nonetheless, just got the car perfectly around. It's amazing, given that this is a front-wheel drive Clio, actually how oversteery Valtteri made it, probably deliberately most of the time, much more than I would have. And the other thing was, it was good to be in a Renault, celebrating that win, another full podium for them in Japan. And I thought it was a very nice touch there, just along the way, that Remy Taffin, a friend of our show, we've had him on before from Renault, was on the podium to accept the Constructors' Award there at Suzuka. A big handbrake turn here from Valtteri. The boys in the back loved that one. And just to finish that story, and I thought it was very sweet how Remy was in his Renault shirt before the podium, but by the time he got up there, he's in a Red Bull shirt. So that was a very nice little touch, I thought. Anyway, driving back into the garage now, always a privilege to experience the massive gulf between a driver like Bottas, and indeed all the Formula One drivers, most of the racing drivers of the world indeed, and guys like me, mere mortals. So that was always fun. And I couldn't resist at the end just asking Valtteri about Suzuka, and particularly about the Suzuka S's.
Tell me about the Suzuka S's in qualifying. What was it like? How much fun was that?
A lot of fun. In qualifying we had the privilege to have headwind in Sector 1 in the S's, so it was very nice, so grippy. And the race itself, you know, it's a long race, and it's a lot about time management, because it's so quick, you know. You put so much lateral energy in the tires, so, you know, it was a lot about managing in the race, but, you know, the qualifying, that's what I really enjoyed, just flat out.
Brilliant circuit.
Yeah, it's the best in the world.
Well, that's about all we have time for on this week's show. Thanks for watching and or listening, because I know a lot of you are listening on iTunes now. Thanks for that. Thanks to Knockout and to F1 Racing for your support. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and Scarbs, I'm still waiting for you to ask what black t-shirt I'm wearing under this zip pullover. You know, I'm wearing it specifically so that you can...
Peter, what t-shirt are you wearing?
Well, of course, I'm wearing my RCero Racing t-shirt, because this is the week 50 years ago when Jim Clark raced for the Arciero brothers for the first time. He should have done it at Riverside, as you know, but when he got there, the Lotus 19 had an oil leak, and he had to drive a brand new Lotus 23B, which he had to go and organize himself down at the local LA dealer, and won his class, finished 5th overall, and then this weekend he's racing at Laguna Seca, so we'll have to see how he goes. You can follow all that on my blog, peterwindsor.com. We're going through Jim Clark's 1963 season as it happens. The dates are identical 50 years on. Thanks again for watching. See you again next week.